The moment Jimin's eyes met Jungkook and Taehyung after months of painful silence, the world seemed to stop. Before anyone could understand what was happening, the warmth vanished from Jimin's face, his body collapsed without warning, and a deafening wave of panic swept through everyone around him. What should have been a long-awaited reunion suddenly became a nightmare filled with fear, guilt, and unanswered questions. But Jimin's collapse was never just about exhaustion. Hidden beneath that heartbreaking moment was a secret sacrifice so devastating that it would force Jungkook, Taehyung, and everyone who cared about them to confront a truth capable of shattering millions of hearts forever. For as long as anyone could remember, Jimin had been the quiet heart that held everyone together, always carrying a gentle smile even when the weight on his shoulders grew heavier with every passing day. Beside him, Jungkook had become both his greatest source of strength and the one person capable of understanding emotions that words could never fully express. Their bond had survived endless challenges, relentless schedules, and countless sacrifices, creating a connection that seemed impossible to break. Even Taehyung, who had witnessed their unwavering loyalty through every joyful and painful chapter, believed nothing in the world could ever separate them. Yet beneath the comforting memories and familiar smiles, invisible cracks had already begun to spread. Unspoken guilt, hidden promises, and painful choices quietly shaped a future none of them were prepared to face. Every passing day pulled them closer to a reunion that should have healed old wounds, but destiny had prepared something far more heartbreaking. None of them realized that one forgotten decision, one carefully hidden sacrifice, and one unbearable truth would transform that long-awaited moment into the beginning of an emotional tragedy that would forever change their lives. Days before the reunion, an unsettling feeling quietly followed Jimin wherever he went. Although he continued to fulfill every responsibility with the same warmth and dedication everyone admired, exhaustion slowly settled behind his gentle eyes. He carefully concealed every sign of emotional pain, convincing himself that protecting the people he loved mattered more than revealing the burden he carried alone. Meanwhile, Jungkook struggled with a different kind of loneliness, haunted by misunderstandings that had slowly built walls between them despite the countless memories they still shared. Every attempt to move forward seemed to uncover another unanswered question, making the distance feel greater with each passing day. Taehyung sensed that something was deeply wrong, yet every conversation ended with reassuring smiles that hid far more than they revealed. Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope also noticed the growing silence surrounding the two closest friends, but none of them imagined how deeply those invisible wounds had taken root. As the day of their reunion finally arrived, hope quietly filled everyone's hearts. They believed old misunderstandings would finally disappear, forgotten promises would be fulfilled, and broken trust would slowly begin to heal. Instead, fate was preparing a heartbreaking chain of events that had already begun long before any of them stepped into the same room, and the first devastating sign was only moments away from changing everything forever. As Jimin walked toward the reunion, every step felt heavier than the last, not because he feared seeing Jungkook or Taehyung again, but because he knew the truth he had buried for so long could no longer remain hidden forever. The familiar faces, the comforting atmosphere, and the memories that once filled his heart with happiness now blended with an overwhelming sense of guilt that tightened around his chest. Jungkook, unaware of the silent battle raging inside Jimin, held on to the hope that this meeting would finally erase months of confusion and emotional distance. Taehyung watched them carefully, noticing the hesitation in Jimin's movements and the quiet longing in Jungkook's eyes, sensing that neither of them was telling the whole story. Around them, Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope believed they were about to witness a heartfelt reconciliation, never suspecting that every smile concealed another painful secret waiting to surface. The air itself seemed strangely heavy, as though time had slowed to prepare everyone for a moment that would leave permanent scars on their hearts. Then, just as Jimin's trembling eyes finally met Jungkook's gaze, an unbearable wave of emotion crashed through him, and before anyone could react, the strength he had fought so desperately to preserve vanished in an instant, setting into motion a heartbreaking truth that none of them would ever be able to forget. The instant Jimin collapsed, Every heartbeat in the room seemed to freeze as disbelief turned into overwhelming panic. Jungkook rushed forward without hesitation, his mind refusing to accept the terrifying scene unfolding before his eyes, while Taehyung stood frozen for a brief moment, overwhelmed by a crushing feeling that this tragedy had been silently approaching for far longer than anyone had realized. RM immediately tried to restore order, Jin fought to remain calm despite the fear growing inside him, Sugar quietly recognized that the signs had been there all along, and J-Hope desperately searched for hope in a situation that suddenly felt impossible to control. Yet even as everyone surrounded Jimin with desperate concern, none of them understood that his collapse was only the beginning of an even more devastating revelation. Hidden beneath months of forced smiles, quiet sacrifices, and painful misunderstandings lay a truth so heartbreaking that it would challenge every memory they treasured, every promise they had ever made, and every belief they held about love, loyalty, and forgiveness. By the time that hidden truth finally emerged, the reunion they had dreamed of would never again be remembered as a joyful homecoming, but as the day their lives changed forever. As the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway and urgent hands struggled to help Jimin, Jungkook could not shake the unbearable feeling that he had overlooked countless silent cries for help hidden behind Jimin's reassuring smile. Every memory of their time together suddenly returned with painful clarity, revealing moments that had once seemed ordinary but now carried heartbreaking meaning. The late nights Jimin claimed he was simply tired, the gentle smiles that faded the moment no one was watching, the subtle attempts to avoid difficult conversations, and the quiet sacrifices he dismissed as insignificant all formed pieces of a truth that had remained invisible until it was almost too late. Taehyung, standing only a few steps away, realized he had also mistaken Jimin's strength for peace, never imagining that someone capable of comforting everyone else had been carrying unbearable pain alone. As fear spread across every face, a single unanswered question began haunting them all more than anything else. If Jimin had been suffering for so long, what terrible secret had convinced him that protecting the people he loved was worth sacrificing himself, and would the truth arrive before they lost the chance to hear it from him forever? While the medical team fought to stabilize Jimin, an unexpected discovery began to unravel everything the others thought they knew. Among his personal belongings was a carefully protected envelope that none of them had ever seen before, its edges worn from being carried every single day as if it contained something too precious to leave behind. At first, no one dared to open it, believing it was a private memory meant only for Jimin. But as the fear of losing him grew stronger with every passing minute, the envelope became impossible to ignore. Inside were handwritten pages filled with quiet reflections, unspoken regrets, and heartfelt gratitude toward the people who had unknowingly become the reason he continued moving forward despite the overwhelming burden he carried. There were no words of blame, no anger, and no bitterness, only a painful determination to protect Jungkook, Taehyung, and the rest of those he loved from a truth he believed would only bring them suffering. As Jungkook slowly realized that every misunderstanding had been built upon sacrifices Jimin had intentionally hidden, the crushing weight of regret settled deep within his heart, and he understood that the answers he had searched for were far more heartbreaking than he had ever imagined. As Jungkook continued reading the final pages, every sentence seemed to tear apart the walls he had built around his heart. The words revealed that Jimin had quietly distanced himself not because his trust had faded, but because he believed carrying the burden alone was the only way to protect everyone from unimaginable pain. Every unanswered message, every missed opportunity, every forced smile, and every moment of silence had been part of a sacrifice no one had recognized until now. Taehyung lowered his head, replaying countless memories that suddenly felt different, realizing how many times Jimin had hidden his own suffering while encouraging everyone else to stay strong. RM, Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope stood in heavy silence, each remembering small details that had once seemed insignificant but now formed a heartbreaking pattern they could no longer ignore. Guilt spread through the room like an unstoppable tide, yet beneath that overwhelming regret remained one fragile hope. Jimin was still fighting, and if fate offered them even one more chance, none of them would allow him to carry such unbearable pain alone ever again. But outside the hospital room, another unexpected truth was already beginning to surface, one capable of changing everything they had just discovered and forcing them to question whether Jimin had truly hidden the entire story. Just as everyone believed they had uncovered the deepest secret, a phone that had remained untouched suddenly vibrated with a message scheduled to be delivered only if Jimin could no longer explain everything himself. The notification immediately drew every eye in the room, filling the already fragile atmosphere with an even greater sense of dread. Jungkook hesitated before opening it, his hands trembling as though he already feared what awaited inside. The message contained details that connected months of misunderstandings into a single heartbreaking truth, revealing that many of the painful choices Jimin had made were never driven by doubt or fading affection, but by a promise he had sworn to keep even if it meant becoming the person everyone misunderstood. Taehyung slowly realized that he had unknowingly become part of that promise, while Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope discovered that each of them had been quietly protected from burdens Jimin refused to let them carry. What had appeared to be emotional distance was, in reality, the greatest act of loyalty Jimin had ever shown. Yet the final lines of the message hinted that one crucial piece of the story had never been written down, because it depended on whether Jimin would open his eyes again, leaving everyone trapped between hope and the terrifying possibility that the most important truth had not yet been spoken. As the long hours crawled by, the silence outside Jimin's hospital room became more painful than any words could have been. Every passing minute deepened the fear that time was slipping away before any of them could make things right. Jungkook remained by the window, unable to look away from the closed door, replaying every memory they had shared and wondering how many chances he had unknowingly allowed to disappear. Taehyung quietly reflected on the countless moments when Jimin had chosen to comfort others instead of asking for help himself, finally understanding that true strength often hides behind the gentlest smile. Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope stood together, united not by certainty but by hope, each silently promising that if Jimin returned to them, they would never again mistake silent endurance for happiness. Then, just as despair began to settle over everyone, the steady sound of medical equipment changed, followed by unexpected movement inside the room. A nurse rushed through the doorway, her expression impossible to read, and in that single breathless moment every heart stopped once more, because what was about to happen would determine not only Jimin's fate, but also whether the broken bond between him and Jungkook could ever truly be restored. The door slowly opened, and every pair of anxious eyes turned toward the medical team, searching for even the smallest sign of hope. No one spoke, yet the silence itself carried the weight of countless prayers and unbearable regret. Jungkook felt his heartbeat pounding louder than the world around him, unable to escape the fear that the next few seconds would define the rest of his life. Taehyung clenched his trembling hands, while Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope stood frozen, each silently wishing they could turn back time and notice the pain Jimin had hidden behind his unwavering kindness. Then came the first fragile sign that everything had not been lost. Jimin's condition had stabilized, but he remained unconscious, trapped in a place where no one could reach him. Relief swept through the room for only a brief moment before another revelation emerged. The doctors explained that Jimin's collapse had not been caused by a single incident, but by months of relentless physical exhaustion and overwhelming emotional strain that had silently pushed his body beyond its limits. Hearing those words shattered everyone even more deeply than before, because they finally understood that this tragedy had not happened in a single day. It had been unfolding in silence while those who loved him believed he was simply staying strong, and now they were left to wonder whether love alone would be enough to bring him back. As night gave way to the first light of dawn, the atmosphere inside the hospital remained suspended between hope and heartbreak. No one was willing to leave, as though stepping away even for a moment might mean missing the chance to be there when Jimin finally opened his eyes. Jungkook stayed closest to him, consumed by memories that now felt painfully incomplete, realizing that the strongest bonds are often tested not by distance alone but by the silence left behind when emotions remain unspoken. Taehyung quietly watched over them both, carrying the same burden of regret while promising himself that if this ordeal came to an end, he would never again allow misunderstandings to grow in the shadows of pride and fear. Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope found comfort only in one another, understanding that every hardship had reminded them how fragile even the deepest relationships could become when people chose to suffer alone. Then, without warning, Jimin's fingers moved ever so slightly, followed by the faintest change in his breathing. It was a tiny sign, almost impossible to notice, yet powerful enough to ignite hope throughout the room. None of them realized that the moment Jimin awakened, the final truth he had protected for so long would finally come to light, bringing with it an emotional revelation that would either heal every broken heart or leave scars that would remain forever. Slowly, Jimin's eyelids began to tremble, and after what felt like an eternity, his eyes finally opened to the blurred faces that had never stopped waiting for him. Relief instantly washed over the room, but it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming wave of emotion as tears silently filled every pair of eyes. Jungkook felt an indescribable mixture of gratitude, guilt, and hope, realizing that this second chance carried a responsibility far greater than simply repairing what had been broken. Taehyung lowered his head, grateful that fate had granted them another opportunity before regret became permanent. Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope understood that surviving the tragedy was only the beginning, because healing the invisible wounds left behind would demand honesty, forgiveness, patience, and unwavering trust from everyone involved. As Jimin quietly looked at the people surrounding him, the burden he had carried alone for so long finally began to lift. The painful misunderstandings that had once driven them apart no longer mattered as much as the simple fact that they were together again. Yet deep inside every heart remained one unforgettable realization: love is never measured by the sacrifices that remain hidden, but by the courage to share pain before it becomes too heavy to carry alone, a lesson that would forever bind them together and leave millions reflecting on the precious people they still have time to cherish before silence steals the chance to say what truly matters. In the days that followed, recovery became more than a journey of healing for Jimin alone. It became a transformation for everyone whose lives had been touched by his quiet strength. Jungkook no longer measured devotion through unspoken endurance, but through the willingness to stand beside someone even when the burden could not be understood immediately. Taehyung discovered that genuine friendship required more than loyalty during joyful moments. It demanded the courage to notice the silent battles hidden behind reassuring smiles. Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope also carried the experience forward, reminding one another that the strongest family is not the one that never faces hardship, but the one that refuses to let anyone suffer in isolation. Although the painful memories of that heartbreaking reunion would never completely disappear, they gradually became reminders of how precious trust, honesty, and compassion truly are. The scars left behind no longer symbolized loss alone but also resilience, forgiveness, and the extraordinary power of choosing one another again after everything had nearly fallen apart. And long after the tears had dried and hope had returned, one unforgettable truth remained in every heart: the greatest tragedy is not the pain people can see, but the pain they hide out of love, and the greatest miracle is finding the courage to reach for one another before it is too late, a message that would continue to resonate with millions long after the story came to an end. Even years later, whenever they looked back on that unforgettable reunion, none of them remembered it only as the day Jimin collapsed. They remembered it as the moment that forever changed the way they valued one another, teaching them that true love, friendship, and loyalty are not proven through silent suffering but through the courage to ask for help and the compassion to truly listen. Jungkook carried that lesson into every step of his future, never allowing misunderstandings to linger without reaching out first. Taehyung became more attentive to the emotions hidden beneath cheerful expressions, while Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope strengthened the bond that had always connected them by choosing openness over pride and understanding over assumption. As for Jimin, he no longer believed he had to protect everyone by carrying every burden alone. Instead, he discovered that sharing pain with those who genuinely care does not make a person weaker. It allows every heart to become stronger together. Their journey, born from heartbreak and nearly ending in irreversible loss, became a timeless reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal when trust is rebuilt, forgiveness is embraced, and love is expressed before silence steals another precious chance. If this story touched your heart, perhaps its greatest message is one worth carrying into your own life. Never wait until someone falls before reminding them they never have to stand alone. Morning sunlight slowly filled Jimin's hospital room, bringing a sense of peace that had been absent for what felt like an eternity. Yet beneath the quiet relief, an uneasy feeling lingered in every heart. They had survived the tragedy that nearly tore them apart, but none of them realized that the greatest challenge was only beginning. Some wounds heal faster than others, and while Jimin's body gradually regained its strength, the emotional scars left behind refused to disappear so easily. Jungkook stayed by his side whenever possible, determined never to repeat the mistakes that had allowed silence to grow between them. Taehyung, RM, Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope also remained close, believing that together they could protect the fragile happiness they had finally found again. However, beyond the hospital walls, an unexpected discovery quietly waited to test that renewed trust. A forgotten file connected to the mysterious events leading up to Jimin's collapse had suddenly resurfaced, containing evidence that someone had deliberately manipulated the misunderstanding separating Jimin and Jungkook from the very beginning. The painful distance they blamed on themselves might never have been an accident at all, and the truth hidden inside the file threatened to reopen every wound they had only just begun to heal. The discovery of the forgotten file changed everything they thought they had already understood. What had seemed like a painful series of unfortunate misunderstandings now appeared to follow a pattern too precise to be dismissed as coincidence. Every delayed message, every cancelled meeting, every moment that pushed Jimin and Jungkook farther apart suddenly carried a different meaning. RM carefully examined the timeline, while Jin, Sugar, J-Hope, and Taehyung began comparing memories they had never thought were important before. Piece by piece, they uncovered small inconsistencies that had gone unnoticed during the emotional chaos of the previous months. Jimin, still recovering, struggled with the realization that he had blamed himself for choices that may have been influenced by forces beyond his control. Jungkook felt an even heavier weight settle upon his heart, knowing that if someone had intentionally driven them apart, then precious time, trust, and happiness had been stolen from both of them. Yet the file ended abruptly, as though its author had been interrupted before revealing the final answer. On the last page appeared only a single handwritten sentence: the greatest betrayal was never committed by an enemy, but by someone who believed they were protecting the people they loved. As those haunting words echoed in everyone's mind, they realized that finding the truth would demand more than courage. It would force them to question every memory they once considered certain, leading them toward another emotional journey from which there would be no turning back. The handwritten sentence refused to leave anyone's mind, casting a shadow over every conversation that followed. No one wanted to accuse the wrong person, yet no one could ignore the possibility that someone within their trusted circle had made a devastating decision, believing it was an act of protection rather than betrayal. Jimin watched the growing uncertainty with a heavy heart, fearing that the fragile bond they had only just rebuilt might shatter once again if suspicion replaced trust. Jungkook made a silent promise that this time he would not allow fear or assumptions to guide his choices. Instead of searching for someone to blame, he focused on uncovering the complete truth, convinced that only honesty could prevent history from repeating itself. Taehyung stood firmly beside them, determined that whatever answer awaited, they would face it together instead of drifting apart as they had before. Meanwhile, RM carefully organized every document. Jin recalled forgotten details from months earlier, Sugar quietly noticed patterns others had overlooked, and J-Hope encouraged everyone not to lose hope before the facts were clear. Then, hidden inside the lining of the old file, they discovered one final sealed envelope that no one had noticed before. Its surface bore only a date matching the day Jimin and Jungkook first began distancing themselves from each other. None of them knew what the envelope contained, but they all sensed the same unsettling truth. Once it was opened, the last remaining illusion would disappear forever, and their lives would never be the same again. With trembling hands, Jungkook carefully broke the seal on the forgotten envelope while everyone around him held their breath. Inside was not a confession, nor a warning, but a collection of photographs, handwritten notes, and a small memory card that appeared ordinary at first glance. Yet the moment RM examined the dates, a chilling realization spread across the room. Every item had been created before the misunderstandings between Jimin and Jungkook had even begun, suggesting that someone had anticipated the events long before they unfolded. Taehyung felt a wave of unease as familiar places and forgotten moments appeared in the photographs, each one capturing seemingly innocent encounters that now carried an entirely different meaning. Jimin's heart raced as he recognized one particular image showing the last day he and Jungkook had laughed together without fear or distance, only to discover a shadowed figure standing unnoticed in the background. None of them could identify the person, but it was impossible to ignore that the stranger had appeared in several different photographs taken weeks apart. Sugar quietly connected the pattern. Jin realized the figure was always watching from afar, and J-Hope struggled to believe that someone could have remained so close without ever drawing attention. As Jungkook inserted the memory card into a nearby device, the screen flickered to life, revealing the beginning of a recording that had remained hidden for months. Before the video could fully play, however, the screen suddenly froze, leaving only a single frame visible, a blurred silhouette turning toward the camera as if it had known, all along, that one day someone would finally uncover the truth. The frozen image became the center of everyone's attention as RM carefully worked to recover the damaged recording without destroying its remaining data. Every second felt unbearably long, and the silence in the room carried more tension than any spoken accusation could have created. Jimin remained seated, still physically weak, yet emotionally determined to face whatever truth had been hidden from them. Jungkook stayed beside him, refusing to let fear pull them apart again, while Taehyung watched the screen with growing unease, sensing that the answer they sought would change the meaning of every painful memory they had shared. After several anxious minutes, the recording finally resumed, revealing shaky footage captured in a quiet hallway. Nothing unusual appeared at first, until a figure stepped into view and gently placed an envelope outside a door before quickly disappearing. Moments later, another unidentified person approached, removed the original envelope, and replaced it with a different one before walking away unnoticed. The discovery left everyone stunned. The message Jimin had been meant to receive had never actually reached him, and the letter Jungkook believed had explained everything was not the one that had originally been written. In a single moment, months of heartbreak took on an entirely new meaning. The distance between them had not grown solely because of silence or fear, but because the truth itself had been quietly altered before either of them ever had the chance to see it. As the video reached its final seconds, the camera unexpectedly captured one last clue, a distinctive bracelet slipping from the wrist of the mysterious person who exchanged the letters. None of them recognized the face, but every one of them recognized the bracelet, and that realization sent a wave of disbelief through the room that no one was prepared to confront. The familiar bracelet brought an unbearable silence over the room. It was not evidence of a villain plotting against them, but of someone who had made a desperate mistake while believing it would protect the people they cared about. As the remaining files were finally recovered, the complete truth emerged. Months earlier, a close staff member had discovered information that suggested Jimin was carrying an overwhelming emotional burden. Fearing that the pressure of maintaining such a deep bond with Jungkook would only make both of them suffer more, that person secretly intercepted their letters, delayed important messages, and encouraged distance instead of communication. The intention had never been to destroy their friendship, but to give each of them what was believed to be space to heal. Instead, those well-meaning decisions created a chain of misunderstandings that nearly ended in irreversible tragedy. Hearing the full story, anger quickly gave way to sorrow. There had been no mastermind seeking revenge, only a painful reminder that even good intentions can leave lasting scars when honesty is replaced by silence. Jimin closed his eyes for a moment, not to relive the pain, but to let go of the weight he had carried for so long. Jungkook realized that holding on to resentment would only repeat the very cycle that had nearly broken them forever. Taehyung, RM, Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope also understood that blame alone could never restore the precious time they had lost. Together, they chose forgiveness, not because the past no longer mattered, but because their future mattered more. The intercepted letters were finally returned to their rightful owners, allowing every heartfelt word that had been hidden for months to be read at last. Each page revealed unwavering trust, quiet gratitude, and a promise that neither Jimin nor Jungkook had ever truly stopped believing in the other. Tears flowed freely, but this time they were no longer born from regret alone. They carried relief, understanding, and the joy of rediscovering a bond that had survived every misunderstanding placed in its path. As they stepped outside the hospital together beneath a clear morning sky, they silently accepted that life would continue to bring uncertainty, but they would never again allow unspoken fears to decide their future. From that day forward, every difficult emotion would be shared, every misunderstanding would be faced together, and every moment with the people they loved would be treasured before it became another memory. Their journey proved that the strongest relationships are not those that never break, but those that find the courage to heal, forgive, and trust again. And with that lesson carried in every heart, a painful chapter finally came to its end, leaving behind not a story of loss, but a story of hope that would continue to inspire anyone who believed that love, loyalty, and honesty are always stronger than silence.